Have you ever thought about becoming a cookbook photographer or even photographing your own cookbook? Then I've got an episode for you. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, a podcast for curious writers, readers, and cooks. This is Kristin Donnelly, and I'm recording without my co-hosts because I have a very special guest. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Yossy Arefi, a Brooklyn-based cookbook author, photographer, and food stylist. I've been lucky enough to work with Yossy on two projects, my own cookbook, Modern Potluck, and The Chef's Garden, which I wrote with farmer Lee Jones. Yossy is the author and photographer of Snacking Cakes, which won an IACP award, and Sweeter Off the Vine, fruit desserts for every season. She writes the award-winning blog Apartment 2B Baking Co., which celebrates seasonal baking and preserving. As a photographer, stylist, and recipe developer, Yossy works with many clients, including the New York Times, Bon Appetit, Saveur, Martha Stewart, and so many more. Well, hi, Yossy. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to see you and talk to you again. It's been a while. I wanted to have you on Everything Cookbooks because you have such a variety of experiences. You're an author, you're a photographer, you're a stylist, and you've worked on your own cookbooks in those capacities, as well as other people's cookbooks in those capacities. So I just thought you would make an amazing guest and have really wonderful insight for people. First, I'd just love to talk about how you got started.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I do kind of have a unique experience in the cookbook world and the photography world because I have kind of participated in it in so many different ways. I think the way that I got started in photography was really similar to a lot of people. It was something that I was always curious about. I was always a kid with a camera carrying it around. I just cleaned out some photos from my childhood bedroom, and I had photos from elementary school and middle school, just boxes and boxes of them. So it was always just something that I loved doing. And then when I got to college, I took a few more formal classes and I learned how to develop film and develop photos in the darkroom, which was really cool. And then the way I got into food photography was when I was working as a baker in a restaurant. This whole blogging world was kind of exploding. And I kind of learned that I could take this passion that I had for photography and this passion that I had for food, and I could combine them in this really fun and creative way. So I just started blogging probably, it was like 10 years ago. I still have a blog that I don't update very often, but it's still around. But yeah, it was just always something that I really loved. And then it was just such a dream to be able to combine the other thing that I really love, which is food, with photography.
Are you still in apartment 2B?
Not 2B, but coincidentally, I am in apartment 2.
Oh, funny. So, is that a requirement from now on? No.
Yeah, I've been in New York for about 15 years and I've only lived in 2 apartments, which I think is very unusual.
That is. And so it started with baking photography.
Yeah, it focused on baking, and it focused a lot on photographing like fruit on trees and at the farmer's market. I always loved the colors and textures of fruit growing on trees, and just seeing, I was always curious about how things grew, and my family always gardened. And so I was always kind of exposed to things growing and the beauty of things growing. And so I got really into fruit desserts and preserving. And those things were really fun to photograph because they were really beautiful and colorful.
Mm-hmm. Plus, it's a nice subject. I feel like when you have a baked good or some jam, it will stay looking really nice for quite a while compared to some other dishes.
Yeah, there's a lot more flexibility there. You don't have to worry about it melting or wilting.
So how did you transition to doing photography more professionally?
It was a pretty natural transition. I'd kind of grown an audience through blogging and through my social media. And at the time, I was also really interested in food styling. And so I kind of sent out a bunch of emails to food stylists and food photographers whose work I really liked, and asked, can I come shadow you? Can I assist you? Can I be like your fourth assistant that takes out the garbage? Like, what can I do to kind of be on set and see how these bigger projects work? And then I was starting to get contacted by editors to do kind of smaller jobs, like online only. I did a few things for Bon Appetit really early in my career that were just like jobs that I shot and styled by myself at home. And then kind of when I started doing that and going more freelance, I also pretty quickly got an opportunity to write and photograph my own book, which created this like incredibly powerful body of work that I could then also shop around to editors at publishing houses.
I want to dig into a couple things here. So how did you figure out who to contact in terms of the photographers?
I mean, I honestly just found names of people whose work I really liked, and I went to their website and contacted them through their contact form. I didn't hear back from very many of them. I mostly heard back from food stylists, and but it was, I probably sent out 50 emails and maybe I heard one back or two back. It wasn't like this like crazy windfall of work that's just started rolling in. It was really slow. And during that time, I was also still trying to make my own work, working on my blog, trying to learn lighting techniques and taking online classes to like fill in the skill gaps that I had. But it was really kind of almost all self-motivated learning and seeking out people to work with. And the truth is that, I did work with a few people, but not a crazy amount. I was able to find clients mostly through my social media and website to start working for them. But I've been doing it for over 10 years now. And I feel like it just took me a long time to find my people and find my clients.
The 50 emails and one response, I feel like that's often a typical ratio, like often under 10%. And I have to remember that sometimes myself when I'm like trying to hustle up something and you get discouraged when you don't hear back. And it's like, I got to remember to follow up. I got to remember the response rate's often, 10% or less. So I think for people who are just starting out, it's good to hear that, to keep going. So you have experience shooting other people's books, and then you've shot your own books. Tell me about the difference.
Yeah, for my own books, I've photographed 2. My first book was called Sweeter Off the Vine, and it was all fruit desserts. And I was able to shoot that book over the course of a year. It's very seasonally focused. And so I wanted to be able to shoot all of the fruit in the book seasonally. I wanted to be able to go to a berry patch and to an orchard and to shoot all of the different things growing and at the farmer's market. It was a really important part of that book for me, was just to capture the beauty of things growing and the color of things growing. And so over the course of a year, I went to visit my parents in Seattle in the summer, and I photographed at their community garden. And I went down to Corvallis, Oregon with my friend Camille Storch, who lives down there. And she kind of took me around to all of her friends who farmed, and she took me to her parents' little backyard farm. And she took me to this incredible place called the USDA Germplasm Repository, which is where the world collection of pears grow. And so I was able to see hundreds of different varieties of pears growing. It was just like this kind of all-encompassing project that I took a long time to photograph. I was just got really caught up in it, and I wanted to photograph every possible variety of every single thing that I could. And 10 Speed was a really great partner on that book. They ended up adding pages just to include more photography, which was really cool.
Nice.
I think the book is really, really beautiful.
It is.
Yeah. The desserts are really colorful and all of that stuff, which is really great. And I also, there were some things in that book that were really hyper seasonal that I was only going to be able to shoot during a short window. And so I did a few kind of batches of photography for that book when I knew things would be in season. I think I did like 3 batches, and then I filled in a little bit here and there. And then with snacking cakes, it was not as important for it to be photographed seasonally or anything. There were only a few things that were even mildly seasonal in the book. For that, I did kind of more a traditional photo shoot where I hired someone to bake for me, and I hired a stylist and a studio. And so we went into the studio together. There were just 3 of us, which is a really small crew for a photo shoot. I knew that the recipes were really simple, and I figured that we could do it. We probably could have used an extra person or 2, but we made it work. And so I photographed that book and did most of the on-set food styling. I had someone prop style for me, and we did that over, I think we had 5 days in the studio. And then I picked up quite a few shots at home, kind of like ingredient shots and just some things that I didn't love from the studio that I kind of didn't really know how I wanted to shoot. And so I was able to shoot them again at home, which is like a huge luxury for a cookbook.
Yeah.
Because usually an author is not involved in the styling or in the photography directly. You know, sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not there. But there's generally not an opportunity to go back and shoot things again. Since I can do that, I really took advantage of it.
And why did you decide to do it that way, more like a traditional photo shoot?
There were a few reasons that I did it. One was because I knew that I wanted to rent props. The kind of best way to do that is to just batch it. Usually when you rent props, you rent them for like a week. And so I knew that I was going to need to rent things and rent surfaces. And I didn't want to have to do it more than once or coordinate it more than once. And the other reason that I did it that way was because when you shoot a whole book kind of in one go, or in maybe sometimes you do like 5 days in 5 days, the book tends to have, I think, a more cohesive look when you're shooting it all at once. And for this book, for Snacking Cakes, I knew that that was kind of the direction that I wanted to go with it. Sweeter Off the Vine was a little bit looser because I did want it to show that seasonality. And I knew that, you know, even in the photography, I wanted to show the seasonality. And so it felt fine to me to do it that way. But with Snacking Cakes, I just kind of wanted to get it done all at once, basically.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. In our previous episode talking about photography, we talked about the productions that photo shoots often are and explaining the team. And you have the advantage of being both a food stylist and photographer. How do you think that benefits you?
It's a really nice combination to be able to do both and to kind of know the ins and outs of both, because it just helps you, I think, communicate really well when you're working with a food stylist. You know, there are some things like we were talking about that you can put on set and you can shoot them for an hour and they'll look exactly the same. And there are some things that, you know, you maybe only get a few minutes to get the shot before it starts to wilt or melt or congeal or, you know, whatever food does lots of different stuff. And sometimes it does things that you don't expect. And when you can approach a shot from a food stylist perspective, you can anticipate those things. And so, you know, I have to have my lighting set and we have to have the props set and we have a limited time to do this. Or you know that maybe a dish will look better from a certain angle versus another one. I think you can just get a wider picture of what it takes to actually make the shot versus when you're just approaching it from one angle.
That makes sense.
And I think it just helps you communicate a little bit better. You know the right question to ask.
Yeah, communication. And there is such a strong teamwork aspect of photo shoots. And now that you're the one hired as the photographer, how do you go about creating the team?
Creating a team is a really important part of the process. Obviously, it's important to choose stylists whose work that you really like and whose work that you really trust, because when you're working on a cookbook shoot, things are going really fast and there isn't a lot of time to kind of nitpick things. And so it's great to be able to work with someone who just puts things on set that you love immediately, or if you don't love them immediately, you can, make a few quick changes and kind of keep the day going. I think food styling and photography and cookbooks and working in food generally is just so fun. And it should always be really fun. So if you're on set with people that you're like not having a good time with, then they're not the right people for you. And maybe you don't work with them again, which happens. And not all personalities get along and not all people get along in the best way. But I just think that, we're all so lucky to be able to do this job that, it can be stressful and things can be tricky, but it should always just have a baseline of being a good time. even if things get stressful and even if you're working really hard and working really fast, it's really important to me that everyone feels respected and everyone feels like their ideas are being heard and everyone's having a good time.
I love the camaraderie of photo shoots, and especially being an author and writer where it's so solitary a lot of the time. It's one of my favorite parts of the process. You've said that you are shooting more at home. Is that right?
Yeah. And the last couple of years, I did a lot of work by myself at home, both shooting and styling. It kind of depends on the budget of the project that you're working on, honestly. But that set work is definitely back and I'm working less at home, which is good and bad. Less to clean up at home for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know the cleaning of.
I always say that 50% of the job is dishes anyway. If you're food styling or recipe developing, it's just endless dishes and grocery shopping. That's like at least half of the job.
Do you tell that to aspiring stylists?
I do. It's a lot of carrying heavy stuff, a lot of working in weird, maybe not ideal conditions, a lot of grocery shopping, a lot of dishes.
Especially New York City.
Oh yeah. But also the benefit of having a grocery store within walking distance pretty much anywhere you ever are, which is
True.
Luxurious.
True. This actually brings me to some of the challenges, budgets for photo shoots. This is something, I was very honest about during my process. Like I was not prepared for how much money to spend as an author on photography. And it's something we made pretty clear in the last episode, that photography is expensive. And we talk about why, you're paying a team, you're paying for groceries, you're paying for space.
I'm sure you've heard that the photography usually comes out of the author's advance, which is...
Exactly. Not always, but...
Yeah. When I first learned that, it was really surprising to me that it was, coming out of that author's check.
Yeah. And just the cash flow of that can be pretty challenging. So it's one of those realities of cookbook authoring. Now I know. Now, anytime somebody wants to do a cookbook, it's one of the first things I tell them. What are some things you wish authors knew when approaching photography?
Yeah, I think that it's really important for authors and the teams that they're working with to kind of have a unified vision of what the book looks like. And the team isn't just the author and the photographers, it's also the editor, the publisher, and it's art directors and creative directors and designers. Sometimes, like for example, for snacking cakes, I had a really specific style that I wanted to shoot. And also I knew that there was going to have to be text on almost every photograph, which changed a lot of how we styled it during the shoot. So I would just say, I just think it's really important that like everyone's on the same page when you get there, because it will just help the shoot flow much better. It'll help everyone be able to make the best and most beautiful work. And I think, some of the stuff that you maybe talked about in that other episode about, what it does take to put a team together, especially if you're shooting in a big city, it can be quite expensive. And there are a lot of ways to cut those costs and make those costs smaller for sure. But it is really expensive. And I know it's like a very high pressure situation for everyone because, the author is putting a lot of investment into the book, both, financially and probably emotionally too. And it's really important to me to really deliver for those authors because I have been in both positions. I know what it feels like to, be spending that money on a project and to be really proud of the project and to want it to look a specific way. So I think it's just, everyone just needs to be on the same page, and hopefully the author is working with someone whose work that they really love and they really trust and they, have seen their work before. And can say, I love, what you did for this book, and I'd love to do something similar for mine. And I think that just helps those days go more smoothly.
Mm-hmm. And what about shooting the cover? What are some of the considerations you make?
Covers are really tricky because I think that the publisher has a lot of control over what they want for the cover. I know for both of my books, we ended up reshooting photos for the cover. There were some like concepts that they really liked that we had done during the photo shoot that they wanted to kind of go back and refine a little bit. And since, I can reshoot things on my own, I was able to do that. The cover for Snacking Cakes I reshot, I think it was the second week of March 2020, one of the most stressful and scary times. And I was like, do the crumbs on this knife look good? I don't know. But I think cover, is just, you can have an idea of what you might like, but ultimately the publisher has a lot of control over what they want. And, hopefully your contract says that you have approval or you have some say in the cover, but generally someone else is making that choice in my experience. But I think, if you have an idea of something that you really love, definitely share it and don't be afraid to, voice that opinion. But a lot of times, in my experience, someone else is making the choice.
Yeah. And it's often a combination. This is where it's like they really bring in the sales team and get their perspective as well as the editorial team.
Yeah. A lot that happens after the photo shoot in terms of design, those creative conversations that most of the time the author's not even involved in. And then they're, presented with some ideas from the publisher that they may or may not love. And so,
yeah, it's
such an intense process to write a book. And then for me, I know that when my books came out, I was incredibly proud and so happy that they were out. But I really couldn't look at every single page. I had to wait for a little while before I could really page through it and like appreciate all of the work. It took
Oh yeah.
It took a minute to go back there after the, months and months of sometimes joy and sometimes agony of getting through it.
It's like very vulnerable because you're like, I can't change anything. So I don't even want to know. But then you're also exhausted by it all. And
yeah, it's like, I don't want to know if there are any mistakes in this because, there's nothing to do about it. It's not like at a website where you can just go and change a comma or whatever.
Is there anything coming up that you are excited about?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's a trend right now of super, hard light and shadows and contrasty bold colors, which I really love and think is really striking and beautiful. I have a feeling that in the next couple of years might fade a little bit just because, all of those styles are all cyclical and who knows what things are going to look like in the next few years. But I have a feeling that might fade out a little bit, but maybe it won't because it is really like crazy eye-catching and I love seeing those photos. And then, there are also people who just kind of never follow the trends and are always shooting Martha stuff always looks like Martha stuff and Donna Hay always looks like Donna Hay. And, those kind of stylistic things really never change.
This brings up a great question, the artist's point of view with photography and how important you think it is to stay within a style versus play around.
Yeah, I think when you're working like solely as a photographer, it's really important to develop your own style. So when people see your photograph, they know it's you, and it helps editors know your work and think of you for projects that they want to look a specific way. Most photographers do have kind of a signature style, but then they're also able to shoot other styles for other projects if needed. If you're doing commercial photography, it's a lot different than doing editorial photography or cookbook photography, where you need to be able to kind of adjust your style to fit a client's needs. But I think for things like a cookbook and editorial things, having your own style that editors and creative directors can look towards and be like, oh, Yossy would be really good for this project because she shot this project. So, I think one of the reasons maybe you thought that I would be good for the Chef's Garden project was because of Sweeter Off the Vine.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Yossy. Where can people find you these days online?
Yeah, you can find me pretty much anywhere at Yossy Arefi, YOSSYAREFI, Instagram, Twitter, which I never use, but my professional website is there. And then also my blog, still kicking, apt2bbakingco.com.
Great. Thank you, Yossy.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk.
Wow, that conversation with Yossy was so good. Here are my top takeaways. Number 1, even if you want to photograph your own book, you might want to have a concentrated photo shoot rather than shoot each recipe one by one. Why? It helps create a more cohesive look and lets you take advantage of renting props. 2, if you want to get into cookbook photography, ask to assist people who shoot cookbooks. It might take a lot of emails, but it can be worth it. 3, if you're a photographer, develop your own style so people call you when they're looking for a particular look. 4, working on cookbooks and with food in general is fun. Work with people who remember that and who will bring mutual respect to a shoot. And 5, okay, this is something I feel like I left hanging. Yossy said there are ways for authors to save money on photo shoots, and I totally missed following up. So I have some answers, and this is a list within a list, if you will. So 1, instead of renting studio space, find a place to do the photography where you don't have to pay. That could be your home, a friend's home, your restaurant. It just needs to have natural light unless you're using other types of lighting. 2, if you need to use props that aren't your own, and you most likely will, consider doing something called prop and drop. This is where you hire a prop stylist to source everything for you and have it delivered, and then they help you get it back to the prop house. They don't stay on set for the entire shoot. Instead, the photographer, food stylist, and author will work together to choose each prop for each shot. 3, kind of in that same vein, you can see if you can hire a food stylist or a photographer who has some experience as a prop stylist and then pay them to do that work for you. 4, you can act as a food stylist or food stylist assistant or a prop stylist on your shoot. I don't recommend doing this if you've never been on a shoot and you don't have any experience with these jobs, but if you do, it can work. And finally, number 5, hire an up-and-coming photographer. People who are just starting out shooting cookbooks often charge less than those with years or even decades of experience. That said, this doesn't mean you can just go hire your cousin's friend or something. Oftentimes, you and your publisher both need to agree on the photographer, and your publisher is going to favor somebody who has solid experience shooting food. So how do you find up-and-comers? Your publisher can often make suggestions, and you can also look at the photography credits on recipe websites. Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. If you have questions or comments, reach out to us through our website, everythingcookbooks.com. If you have a question that you want answered on the podcast, leave us a voice memo. There's a link you can use on our contact page. Much gratitude goes out to our editor, Abby Circatella. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, which will help more people find the show. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep on cooking.